Welcome to the CSBP Fertilisers Grow Better podcast, sharing knowledge with growers on leading crop nutrition, sustainable agriculture and other issues impacting the agricultural industry.
G'day everyone, thank you for joining us for another edition of the CSBP Grow Better podcast. My name's Grey Johnston and I'm joined here today by Account Manager, Nutrition and Sales, Luigi Moreschi. G'day Luigi, how are you?
Hey Gray, how are you going?
Yeah, not too bad. Thanks for joining us. You're here today to talk to us about one of the long-term trials we've initiated up at Yuna. It was the first year of the trial last year. What can you tell us about the background of that trial?
Particularly in this northern area, a lot of guys have been spading and moldboarding, obviously trying to overcome some soil constraints, particularly with the non-wetting soils that we get up here. So there's been a lot of hectares that have been ameliorated in the past sort of 5 years. And I guess there's been, just trying to look at, what sort of N and K requirements we sort of need on ameliorated soils, because a lot of the soils that we're going into generally, they're fairly good for phosphorus, but generally a lot of our sandplain, obviously, depending on the type of season and what sort of rotation you have, is generally lacking in nitrogen, and we're always, pretty low in K, particularly on the sandplain. So we're just trying to have a look at the effects or the long-term effects of the N rates and K rates that we might need on ameliorated soils.
And so it was the first year of the trial last year, and last year was obviously a big year for the state and some great responses all around the state, but particularly up in that northern area where you are. What sort of results did we see in the trial?
We picked a site we thought was going to be a bit deficient, but after it was ameliorated, the soil test levels came back fairly reasonable. They're sort of averaging about 40 part per million down the profile to 30 centimetres. So, which normally we'd regard that as probably needing maintenance rates of Ks, of potassium, but not necessarily going to be responsive. So we thought we'd still keep looking at the K in this site, particularly over the 4 years, because generally what growers are finding that once it's ameliorated, the yield potentials of these paddocks that have been ameliorated tend to be higher than what they were before they were ameliorated. So, if we keep the same nutrition package on it, do we run low on K? Or, or if you're already a bit marginal, do you just run out faster? So we're just looking at how long that, what that K would do and what different rates of K we needed, particularly with the improved yield expectations of these ameliorated paddocks.
And then we saw a pretty big response to N in the 2021 growing season.
Yeah, so we did. We obviously tissue tested the trial fairly early, just to have a look at the K uptake, particularly potassium, because we sort of get a pretty good feel for whether we're going to get a response to K through plant testing. So we actually plant tested mid to late tillering. The tissue test came back giving us, they came back very high for K uptake. So even the nil plots, which we sampled, where we put no K on, they came back quite high for K. So we thought that potentially that this year, in 2021, that the trial we wouldn't get a response to K, which was the case. We actually got no response to K. We put on 0, 30 and 60 units of K with different rates of N, and at all the different rates of, with the different rates of N, the response curves for 30 nil, 30 and 60 K, basically they all follow the same line. So we got no response to K at all. But we did get a big response to N, and the rotation would suggest that we would have done, mainly because it was a wheat rotation. So just that simple rotation, we thought we'd get some sort of response to N. We did have some summer rain. After that summer rain, the farmer ameliorated the paddock with the it was spaded, and then we managed to seed it on the 19th of May. So it was in reasonably early. We had 3 days after seeding, we had some rain and up and going, and then we had a bit of wind, which caused furrow fill. But yeah, that didn't seem to lessen the yield effects that we got from the nitrogen response. So I mean, the nils were still very good. They were the nils were averaging about 4.5 tonne, and where we put nitrogen, we moved up to about 6.5 tonnes to the hectare. So we've got a pretty solid 2 tonne to the hectare response to nitrogen, probably up to about 84 units of N. We did go to 126 units of N, but the 126 units of N didn't give us much more yield, but did increase our protein dramatically from sort of 10.2% up to 11.7%.
Is that shifting the wheat up to some of those premium ratings?
A lot of growers would say, well, at 4.5 tonne, I'll take whatever protein comes, but it was still 8.1% protein. So the protein was suggesting that that if you did nothing, that you would still get some response to applying nitrogen at those sort of protein levels. And then as we moved it up from 0 up to 42 up to 84 units of N, the yield went up dramatically, picked up our 2 tonne, and our protein went from 8.1 up to 10.2% protein. So at 10.2, still struggling to make APW1, but once we went to 126 units of N, we definitely made APW1. We actually went into the hard 2 category by moving the protein up to 11.7% protein.
And we saw quite a differential in the price growers were getting for their wheat in the split between those categories last year. So that possibly even was a beneficial use of that nitrogen.
Potentially, the fact that we didn't pick up any yield, probably wouldn't have changed the return curve that much.
Okay.
Because we only got a very small response to yield, and so particularly this year, if you're looking at using nitrogen at the prices is at the moment, you probably wouldn't budget on trying to pick that extra bit up. If it was only due to protein, if there was yield and protein involved, then you probably would. But okay. But it was interesting that even at those high rates, when you look at the removal of N, that we didn't actually replace. We were still in a negative balance until we got to 126 units of N.
And so that's showing the benefits of the amelioration, or what's driving that?
Like at Neil, even though we got 4.5 tonne to the hectare yield, just showing that, that amelioration's probably enhanced some of that soil organic carbon breaking down. So we got some benefits out of the amelioration, but there was also some negatives because you're losing some of your soil organic carbon. So even at 84 units of N, we were still losing. We were still negative 33 units of N. So that N has come from the soil organic carbon. So that's actually, whilst we benefited from that, it's actually cost us in our soil organic carbon. And that's a battle that a lot of growers are finding at the moment, asking questions about why organic carbons are dropping away. And that's because we are actually, a lot of that nitrogen that's coming into our crops that is free. Well, it's free to the crop, but but there is a cost to it in that it comes through our soil organic carbon decreasing over time.
So this was the first year of a 4-year trial. I guess what will you be watching this trial for going forward? Going
forward, obviously the nitrogen responses, and this coming year, 2022, it's going into lupins because we thought that the canola wheat, canola rotation couldn't keep going like that. And on sampling, eventually growers do put a legume in there. So we're putting lupins in there, and I guess what we're looking for going forward is, particularly with the nil, where we didn't get a response this year, going forward, if we get higher yields in the future years, will that actually drag the soil K levels down enough so that we do actually get into a responsive situation? So, and by putting lupins in there, if we can grow some good yields, lupins and canola are probably the 2 crops that remove the most amount of K in their grain. So in that, I guess we're hoping that, well, not hoping, but seeing if growing lupins in there will also, I guess, increase the decline of those soil K levels, particularly with the nil treatments. So and we'll see how that goes, and then next year back into wheat again.
Good one. So we'll keep our eye on that one. While we've got you, Luigi, I guess, how's the season looking? How are things shaping up your way at the moment? What are people talking about? What are the trends?
If you had have asked probably middle of March, when we hadn't had any summer rain, cost of inputs were going through the roof, price of canola was at $900 and wheat at $370. Most guys were not feeling that great, but after late March, early April rains, a lot of canola going in on those rains, it's all up and going. Canola now over $1,100 a tonne and wheat over $400 a tonne. That, guys are feeling a bit more positive. And if we can get some rain early May to get all our wheat out of the ground and going, then I think everyone will have hopefully some reasonable yield expectations. And I think there'll be a bit of positivity. If we don't get rain till later May and maybe into June, then obviously, some of that positivity, unfortunately, will probably drop away. But we'll wait and see. We're only in early May now. So
you told us about what you got planned for the loop and rotation at the long-term Yuna trial. What else should we be looking out for in your trials up there in the northern region this year?
This northern region, the rest of the trials have probably got more of a nitrogen slant to them. We've got a bit of a nitrogen sort of hub happening just east of Three Springs, where we're looking at the effects of nitrogen placement with and without stubble. Obviously looking at the effects of nitrogen tie-up, where we've got stubbles, particularly big stubbles coming out from last year, and having a look at the effects of placement on that nitrogen effectiveness and recovery into the crops. That's one of the trials there. We've also got a second trial. We're looking at a product called a urease inhibitor that we can put in with Flexion or urea. Just having a look at the effects of that on recovery of nitrogen, particularly where we can't get can't get rain or soil cover over that nitrogen very quickly, as to whether we're getting any gaseous loss to the atmosphere. And that's probably more relevant in stubble situations, where generally it will have higher levels of urease enzyme, which is what converts the urea nitrogen into ammonium nitrogen, which then can become ammonia and volatilise off. So just having a look at the effects of that and see if that helps us improve our efficiency of nitrogen. And then just looking at timing of nitrogen. A lot of guys will generally apply all their nitrogen on post-emergent, early post-emergent up this northern area. So we're looking at, what's the benefit of banding that nitrogen at seeding time underneath that stubble layer versus applying it post-emergent into the stubble, if you like, and having a look at the recovery of those nitrogens in those situations. And then we've got an interesting one out at Morawa, where we're looking at doing a little bit of work. Like there's a guy from the eastern states called James Hunt was looking at this nitrogen bank type theory for applying nitrogen, particularly in the lower rainfall zones where you don't lose your nitrogen to leaching. That's where you sort of measure your soil, your mineral N, so your nitrate and ammoniums. You work out what your N bank is. So for instance, if it's a 3-ton crop, you might say that your N bank is 150 kilos of N. If there's 50 kilos of N as mineral N or ammonium N, then the grower needs to apply 100 units of fertilizer N to make that bank up to 150. And so you do that, you make that 150 of N your year in, year out N bank, and you measure the nitrate and ammonium left. So if you have a drought that year, then the following year you should pick up that in your soil tests, on your soil tests, and then that means that the applied N that you need to apply should be less. So and the theory behind that is that in good years you make true value of good years, and also slow down the breakdown or slow down of the decrease in the soil organic carbon, because we're actually supplying not only fertilising for the crop, but in a way fertilising for the microbes too. So that means they don't need to attack the soil organic carbon to get their nitrogen, phosphorus and sulphur when they've got a large carbon source in front of them.
Fascinating. Oh, exciting stuff, and one to keep an eye on. If anyone out there wants to keep in touch with what's happening in our trials, they can go to csbpresults.com.au, and in particular, if they're interested in following that Yuna trial that Louis told us about the first year, csbpresults.com.au/Yuna. Luigi, thanks so much for joining us today on the CSBP Grow Better podcast. Go well, and we hope to talk to you soon.
No worries. Thanks, Gray.
Good on you, Louis, and thank you all to everyone out there as well. If you've enjoyed the show, or if you've got any suggestions for topics in the future, please slide into our DMs at CSBP Fertilisers on all your favourite social platforms and leave us some suggestions or some comments or some feedbacks, and we'll try and act on those going forwards. That's it from us for today. I'm Grey Johnston. Thanks for joining us. Cheers. Goodbye. Ciao.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the CSBP Grow Better podcast. For more information about CSBP, please visit csbp-fertilisers.com.au or connect with us on social media at CSBP Fertilisers on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn.